Welcome to the podcast that discusses storytelling from all angles to help you and us answer the call when the muse screams, "Tell the damn story." We'll be exploring the challenges of being creative in fiction, illustration, comics, film, and nonfiction. Hello and welcome again to Tell the Damn Story.
We're still telling it.
We're telling it. And we're telling how and we're telling why. Last episode,
and we're also telling that Tim is still not back with us yet.
Tim, oh my God, Tim is out in America, on adventures, spreading the gospel of Matty Rocket.
Being raised by wolves in Colorado.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, he'll come back with good stories, I'm sure, and drawings, lots of drawings.
There'll be some interesting stuff when he gets back.
Yeah, that's right.
In the meantime, we're going to soldier on. And in our last episode, we talked about putting the character in characters and the how and the why. And if you haven't seen it, you should go back and see that episode. It's pretty great. Or at least it was good. We thought so.
I had fun, yeah.
Yeah. But while we were doing this, our producer, Matthew, brought up a fascinating topic. He mentioned blank heroes and how over the last few years, there has been a pattern of heroes that are kind of a blank slate, and all the support characters have more detailed characterization. They kind of carry the story, while the main hero is kind of blank, and the pros and cons of that would be something.
What do you mean by blank, Mr. Ryan? What do you mean by that?
Well, according to Professor Matthew.
Yeah. There you go.
As a matter of fact, I am going to quote him directly. Hold on a minute.
Oh, it's like that. Okay.
I have the professor's words right here.
Yes. In the beginning, yes.
There was this whole thing on how in all those movies, and he names a few movies such as Matrix and Kick-Ass and a few others. The best character there doesn't fit in with the others. It's kind of a blank slate, and anyone can relate to them. He said that in all those movies, the supporting characters have all the truly memorable lines, while the star is pretty bland in comparison. Specifically for that reason, so that the audience can project themselves onto that character.
And I think he said he read an article or two about that.
Yeah, I forget where he said it was.
Right.
He did give credit. Apparently we're not going to, because I forgot where it was.
Maybe he can get it for us before the show's over.
Well, he is the producer extraordinaire.
Yeah, that's right. So. He can do anything. No pressure.
So let's talk about this idea of a blank slate hero, main protagonist. I see what he means when he talks about Matrix and Kick-Ass. I'm not sure how, and I think we mentioned the
Bourne Identity was also
franchise
initially
as well.
Initially, yeah.
I'm not sure how comfortable I am with accepting that as a viable hero. Yeah, these stories have made money and all that sort of stuff, but what do you think about a blank hero, Alex?
Well, I mean, the first I heard about this was today, and so I haven't percolated on it very thoroughly. But I will say that if that is in truth a real trend, and I do feel that what he's identified is sort of the remembering the original Matrix movie, the first one of those, remembering the original Kick-Ass, and remembering even the Bourne Identity, although I'm not sure that quite fits in as far as I'm concerned. But either way, there are films, yes, where the character is sort of, he plays sort of, I'm moving through the motions, and I'm definitely on track to do something, but all the really intense stuff is happening around me, and I'm reacting to it. And I think that can very easily be seen as comfortable and as usable a gimmick as any of the other things that the film industry and some book series have done, where they've identified a persona that they can build stories around and keep bringing back. I mean, how redundant is Friday the 13th? How redundant is the Jason movies? I mean, you basically know the formula, and Jason really, I mean, at least Freddy has quote unquote some personality. It's the same one, and it sort of plays the same tune, but Jason is it's basically a killing machine, and so it represents terror, if you will. But who do we identify with? Who is the story really sort of playing around? It's the quote unquote characters who were stupid enough not to leave the camp the first chance they got. So ultimately, I think it may just be just one more formula that an industry, which makes its money out of successfully turning out films that people pay to see, has decided to utilize. There's vampires, there's superheroes right now. That's a biggie. There was back in the 80s there was the destruction films, Airplane and Airport rather, and Firing Inferno and
which
Catastrophe.
You still have a little of that with San Andreas and that kind of thing.
Right. So I mean, again, it's a certain shtick that they can repurpose, throw in a few new faces, twist this a little bit, twist that a little bit, and try and turn out something that's going to make them money. I mean, that's the reality of that.
And here's how I would make my peace with this for an audience member who is interested in that kind of story. You have to make your decision of what you're creating, right? A lot of those movies that we're talking about, San Andreas, 2012, Jason, Freddy, they're roller coaster rides.
Mm-hmm.
They're theme park rides. So in that way, when you're creating, particularly in film, but when you're creating something to kind of put the audience in a POV situation where they can go through this and feel the sensations of terror and thrill and all that sort of stuff, okay, then that's what you do. You create a blank character so that the audience can project onto it. But you're creating a thrill ride. You're not telling a story. You're creating a thrill ride. God bless it. That is what it is, all that sort of stuff. There is a percentage of the story-consuming public that want that.
Mm-hmm.
They want the action, they want the thrills and all that stuff. But as sizable or even more sizable is the audience that wants to reflect, wants to grow, wants to see some growth that they can reflect on for themselves, wants to see an experience that they can relate to.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's just you have to know what you're writing. It's
Right.
kind of like a genre. It's kind of like, what's the function of your writing?
Exactly. Well, this is where we go to, because ultimately, again, the realities are this. If you want to create something that's yours and is either in one of these genres or isn't, that's your call. If you want to make a career as a professional writer, either of novels or plays or teleplays or screenplays, and you want to be able to get people to hire you to do this, yeah, you will probably figure out as soon as you can what genre you're comfortable in. But then you'll be in the situation of being hired, if you're really wonderfully lucky, to be hired to write the stuff that they need for their show, for their films, and so forth. And that's what you do. And maybe you will or will not be comfortable with some of the material. But once again, or maybe you're thinking, okay, I'll keep writing this stuff until I get a chance to write that stuff, But either way, your job is still, during that time period, to do the job and to tell that story or those stories correctly. And I will talk back to, and I will not pronounce his name properly, but Stephen Canelli, Stephen J. Canelli, who is a prolific TV producer, but prior to that, and part of that, was a prolific writer in the television industry for years, decades, and then, leaving that career behind quite successfully, he moved into writing mystery novels until, he passed a couple of years ago. But this is a guy who, I can trace his work back to half-hour episodes of One Atom 12, and that era where you're basically knocking out that kind of bland dialogue between these two patrol cops as they roll around Los Angeles doing their job, to Stingray and Greatest American Heroes, and then a bunch of Canadian shows that he produced, because he could go to Canada and produce stuff. He can produce stuff here. So his thing was, he got excited about the material that he was doing. He looked at what the market was calling for. He said, how can I do that with the same sort of flair that I do my other stuff? He found out what needed to be packaged, and he packaged it. And that's a job. That's a career. And it's different.
And there's no, there's no negative on that.
No,
just know if that's what you're doing.
Exactly. And identify that, and understand that you're in a business which is a collaborative business. You've got to understand that. You've got to be able to accept that. If you're not totally in charge of, you got the budget, you're the producer, the director, and the writer, and you get, casting call rights and all that, unless you have that kind of control, you get to turn in your script and wait for everybody to put their red pen to it. And even if you're, they're keeping you on as the original screenwriter, and you're doing this and you're doing that, you're still making changes sometimes right through the shoot.
Mm-hmm.
You turn in blue pages the next day because they got to be on set to do that scene. And with novels, it's editors and agents. They're going to have their 2 cents. But definitely in film and theater, it's a collaborative effort. So that kind of, that's a good thing for you to know and to learn, is how to work with people.
So then, let's talk about the how, and we've kind of talked about the why. If you want to do that, that's and that that's what you're doing, fine. So how would you do a story with a blank slate hero as the protagonist?
Well, since it's not anything that I normally do, I could only speculate.
My
attitude about that, if I had an assignment along those lines, is do a little less work than I normally do on character development. I'm going to have a plot idea. I'm going to create a series of situations. I know that my lead character has to be this protagonist through those situations. But I'm going to hold back on certain developmental aspects of that. I'll know his life situation at the time. I may know a little bit about his background, but I'm not going to keep building him, fleshing him out as thoroughly as I will the characters around him. Because, once again, to me, and again, this may not be the way anybody else does this, but to me, in order to put a protagonist in the center of a film or a story where everything's going to be happening to him, but I want my audience to be able to identify, he's got to be sort of an everyman, or she's got to be an every woman in certain ways. There have got to be things like, if they're a teenager, it's a Peter Parker kind of thing. Okay, certain things that I know people will relate to, whether they're older or younger, about life as a teenager in a certain environment and things like that. And I might hold back. I mean, why do you think a lot of people, and I say this now and I may regret it, but I think one of the reasons a lot of people identified with Spider-Man, with Peter Parker when he first came out, is because there had not been anybody like him before. Superboy was the closest to maybe somebody who had a life, but basically Peter, his life sucked, in certain ways. He was being bullied. He was being bullied. He was a brilliant student, which was great. He was being appreciated that way, but he was socially inept. He did live with and love his Aunt May, and those are the basic things we knew about him. And people could identify with, they could empathize with some of that. But we didn't know a lot. We learned about Uncle Ben, but we didn't learn a lot about his parents and a lot of those other things until years later, as the story began to unfold and other people began to add their 2 cents to it.
True, and with respect, I understand where you're going with that, but I would suggest that Peter Parker had the things, the specifics that allowed people in. He wasn't getting the girl he loved. He wasn't the strongest guy in the high school. He wasn't, so there were specifics. He was guilty about Uncle Ben, and he was loyal to Aunt May. They weren't rich. All these kind of things let people in. But there were details, and details that were built over time. If you look at The Matrix, since Matt brought that one up, what we really know about that guy is, he's in the grind. He's, got a dead end job. The world's kind of gray and all that sort of stuff, and then he gets that choice and kind of goes down the rabbit hole. We don't have a whole lot more, as I remember it, set up about the Matrix. About that character.
Mm-hmm.
It's just he's in a grind. And then it's all about his change, his growth. That minimalist introduction of the character allows us to project our grind, our, gray life, all that sort of stuff. If you looked at way back Wizard of Oz, the black and white introduction was boring Kansas life, mean old lady. She's mad at everybody and goes off in the
everybody doesn't understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Everyone could jump in and project themselves onto Dorothy or as Dorothy. So again, maybe she too is kind of a blank slate.
What I would say here, the element or this sort of point of view that our producer situated us with, I think is interesting. But for me, I don't feel that I can do more than, like I said, speculate about it, because it's not something that I live. It's not a method that I've studied really.
And tell me why that doesn't appeal to you as much.
Well, that's a nice segue right into because well, for one, we have to take into account what I enjoy reading and then what I enjoy writing. That's fine, but I think because I enjoy reading these things and I enjoy writing these things, it's because of what I sort of took in and what I grew up with, what I was surrounded by, and I was surrounded by iconic characters. As growing up as with a single parent, raised by my mother, I was the only child, and we were poor. A lot of the images in my life that kept me fascinated with the world came from the TV set or comic books, and then from books out of the library. So in that order. TV set, Superman, detective stories, westerns, and most of those were hero figures. Comic books, Batman, Superman, some of the other DC heroes, because Marvel didn't exist at that point, in those early days. And
wow.
Hey,
wow.
I was born before Marvel. Was there a world before Marvel? And then the novels and things that I was introduced to. First from films, but then it led me to the books. It's Sherlock Holmes and some of those. The Shadow, which I discovered when I discovered old radio shows, copies of these things that had been played during the 40s, which was before my time, thank you very much. Eat an egg, right? So the thing here was, for me, memorable characters were always in front of me, as gee, I want to be like, or wow, it's cool to read these, or they look this way or that way, or the toys were great to have, and again, heroic figures were a big thing to me. I wanted to be heroic. I wanted to be a good guy. I wanted to grow up and do right for myself and for others. So I locked in on these characters.
I'm going to ask you to expand on one particular. I know from my personal friendship with you that among many of, you're a fan of many of these, but among your favorites is the Lone Ranger.
Oh yeah.
Tell me why he appealed to you. What was it specifically?
It's funny. I will tell you, and I will start out by saying it was a TV show first. I eventually discovered the radio shows and other things, but it was a TV show. In my life, I started out in Harlem, so predominantly for the first 6 years of my life, I was predominantly surrounded by black people, and I saw white people on TV. A couple of times we went downtown, but once we moved downtown from Harlem into a more mixed neighborhood scenario where I'm seeing whites and Chinese and so forth and so on, I'm not seeing unified scenarios. I'm not seeing blacks and whites working together. I'm not seeing a lot of those things until I realized, The Lone Ranger was the only show that I saw on television where my heroes, which he and Tonto were, they were my heroes. My heroes were from two completely different races, two completely different cultures. And these two guys had said, we're a team. We're brothers. I got your back. No matter what goes down, no matter how dangerous it gets, I will be there for you. And if they want to take you out, they got to go through me. And it was always vice versa. There was never a question in my mind. And some of the episodes and later in one of the films, it's proven I will never not be there for you unless I'm dead. That was it. They went through hell for each other. And to see a black man and in this case an Indian, a Native American, doing that was the first thing that said to me that people of different races can work together. This can work. Later it was Bill Cosby and Robert Culp. And I know I mentioned Cosby's name, but I'm talking about back in the day, talking about the power of that image of those two men on television in the 60s at a time when it was still, garbage in a lot of places for a lot of reasons. And this show was totally unique and got all kinds of garbage for a while about, no, they can't be equals. It's got to be, no. And Culp was one of the people that pushed for it. So to me, strong, iconic, memorable characters. Yes, the Lone Ranger and Tonto, the Shadow, Sherlock Holmes, Batman, obviously. These are characters that resonated with me for different reasons, but are memorable. And there's a reason why they are still remembered 70 years later, 80 years later. It's because the work that went into developing the myth of them, the legend of them, the tales, was so rich and so well crafted that folks can't let go of it. There's always a new crop of writers who want to tackle it and add to the canon.
Well, I agree with you. And for me, Captain America, I came of age, understanding that the world went beyond my apartment right around the time of the Watergate trials. And he was running for re-election when I was, I guess, in 6th grade or so, and we had an assignment to back a candidate and run a campaign for a candidate. And I got assigned Nixon, and I was all pro-Nixon and all that sort of stuff. And my mother was volunteering at some senator's re-election bid, and he was a Republican, so he had Nixon buttons as well. And I was able to get Nixon Now and the more prophetic Nixon's the One, which, had a whole different meaning years later, right? But there I kind of invested all my belief in this heroic president, and then, just 2 years later, my dreams of what that meant was shattered. But I discovered that the idea I had of America was not embodied in a real person, but that idea was embodied in Captain America, even though he went through his changes. And I was reading Captain America and the Falcon at the time, and like the Lone Ranger and Tonto, here are two characters that, they were for each other. They were going to be partners, and it was so thrilling when, they were going to have the Falcon in Captain America Winter Soldier, because that was my roots, and they've been true to that ideal that Captain America has about what he believes, and they have found the richness of that character by grounding his beliefs in World War II, and where, we knew who the bad guys were, and we were, and he was kind of more than your average American for those, he doesn't seem affected by the racism of the time and all that sort of stuff, but that's, an idealized character. And the other one that of that generation that stuck with me was Hawkeye. And he's gotten some crap in the last movie that we don't care where he lives and all that stuff. I do, because he was the only one I could be in the Avengers. I wasn't a Norse god. You know,
You're
I
not?
hadn't been hit with gamma rays. No,
No,
no.
no. I knew you that way, but you
A
don't
lot of
glow.
people think otherwise, but no. You know, so I mean, you know, some people say, well, you could have that suit of armor. No, I really couldn't. You know, I don't
And
want
you
to
don't
run
want to be
around.
called Wanda.
But that idea that this is the same idea that's behind the appeal of Batman. If you just worked hard enough, you could be Hawkeye, or if you just worked hard enough and had $1 billion, you could be Captain America. I
Bruce
felt
Wayne.
more, um, I felt closer to Hawkeye because, you know, he could use anything in a pinch, you know. And
Hmm.
they've really developed that recently. You know, he's like a kind of a living weapon. He can use anything. You know, he can throw a mop handle at you or something. Still, that idea, that possibility, you know, is what drew us in. And the reason I think it's okay for us to indulge in this hero worship right now is because if we're really honest with ourselves, as much detail as they've given Hawkeye or Spider-Man or the Shadow or the Lone Ranger, all of them are kind of blank slates because over the generations they haven't changed all that much. Right? There's nuances, there's little enrichments about them, you know, and
Well,
now with comics being the whole universe being, you know, rebooted every 15 months, it's
yeah.
even harder, you know.
I
That's
will. I will
a
say
cop
this
out.
about that. I do think that if we talk comics for a moment, I will say that I think what I have seen in the past 20, 30 years is the reality of how society affects its media at any given time. Because literally, a lot of what I see happening, and if you talk, you talk some of the movies and things like that, what I see happening is because our society right now is going through what I consider to be a very dark period. There's a lot of anger out there. There's a lot of stress and conflict and frustration out there that our heroes are being used to reflect that as well, as opposed to the 40s and 50s where they were being used to help us continue to look up
Right.
and to shine a light through the darkness. Instead, well, we can go into the darkness, we can be one with that darkness, and we can be just as badass as anybody else. And, to some degree, I feel, and again, people, as we get older, we sort of focus on certain things. I like to think that I'm still aware of things going on around me, but I do have certain very key opinions, and I think that you keep feeding darkness to people, that's what they suckle on. That's where their heads and hearts are going to go. So I feel like some of our heroes need, like you said with Hawkeye, I think it's great to know that the guy lives on a farm and he has some sort of a normal family life,
Hmm.
people he loves and cares about, because that says he's not just a killing machine. He's
Right.
not just cannon fodder. Okay? And
And
if you want to go patriotic and military, 99% of our soldiers, that's what they are. They're
right, right.
people pulled out of their everyday lives and thrown into horrendous and heinous situations, and they've got to deal with them and then possibly come back from that, hopefully whole. So to me, that time with Hawkeye in that film, and again, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen, the last Avengers movie, and the time not only seeing Hawkeye's life, but that just in terms of, let's go back to writing for a minute, putting that scene in there, putting the Avengers at that point, the few Avengers that were still there, putting them down in that environment, giving them that time out in that space, humanized everything. And
Right.
it gave everybody a chance to check in and go, whoa, what did I just go through? What did I just deal with? How do I feel about it? And can I pull it together enough to come back at it again? Because
And
it's going to
that's
be coming.
and that's one of the things that a guy of Joss Whedon's caliber brings to the writing and directing of that film. You know, there is the story that the Marvel guys forced him to put in that, you know, lake of knowledge or whatever scene with Thor, and threatened to take the entire farm segment out if he didn't. That's not trusting the person you hired, you know, and that's doing a lot of things. And I understand they're creating a franchise. They're doing a United franchise beyond the scope of anything ever attempted. So I'm not putting them down. But a guy of Whedon's caliber who understands the value of those quiet moments and how you need that to build to a new level of thrill and tension and all that stuff. You can't, I think it's a mistake to threaten that guy's artistry.
It's a
and
mistake.
they've lost him. They've lost him, which is unfortunate for Marvel.
That's the thing. That brings us back to two things. It brings us back to one, the thing that I said earlier, or in the other episode, I forget which now, about this being a collaborative experience that may or may not be wonderful, but that's what it is.
Sure.
Josh had only so much control over the project. The people with the pocketbooks had more control, and they're not looking at it as, damn, I hope he turns out a really fantastic movie with great this and that. I want the quality of the actor. They're not looking at that. I want this bad boy to sell. I want this son of a gun to blow everybody out of the water. I want to see, $4 billion in the next 12 months, and I want to make sure that the sequels we got later. And that's where their heads are. They're in the business, and that's what they do.
Understood.
Josh, all I'm saying is taking
Josh,
it back to
two S's.
Josh, right,
Josh.
that's what I said. Joss. Doth. Yeah. Josh understands his job, and he's good at it. He did it with Buffy, because I saw the original movie. Ow!
Mm-hmm.
So the TV series, far superior. He understands his job, and he takes the time to learn his characters, and he knows how to build those characters that stay with you, those moments that stay with you. And that goes back to, yes, Hollywood can do the blank hero thing. That's yet another thing they're doing. That's all it is to me, just another thing. It's another tool on the belt for them. But I think in terms of longevity, if people didn't take the time to create these strong, powerful characters, there wouldn't be this wave right now. Because there wouldn't have been a Captain America. There wouldn't be Batman. There wouldn't be Superman. These are things that would have been lost. Like who remembers? Was it some of the pulp heroes from the 30s and 40s were in the comic strips, like Don Winslow of the Navy. Who remembers that? Only people who are really fans of that material. Okay?
Right.
But yeah, so that's the thing. Iconic characters or building strong, memorable, engaging characters makes first and foremost for strong, powerful, memorable stories that speak to its audience. Secondly, from a business standpoint, people are more likely to continue to buy what you do if you do it that well. And then third, if you're fortunate and they keep buying and it outlasts you, you begin to build that legacy. And years from now, Mac, people like Walter Gibson or Maxwell Grant, whichever way you know him, and some of the other people who created Lester. Who created Lester?
Dent was Walter Gibson was Shadow.
Lester the Shadow, right? Lester Dent was Doc Savage. Superman, Schuster and Siegel. All these people are gone, but their work lives on and on and on and on, and that says something for the power again of doing your job, letting your imagination just go, and creating something that stands. That's just the job. What other people do to it afterwards, that's something else.
If you want to build the thrill ride, you have your blank character. If you want to build the myth, you got to build the character. You got to build it in with the moments, the quiet moments, the true moments, the characterization. Those are the things that last. That's how you tell the damn story.
Yes, absolutely.
We'll see you next time. Peace.
If you want to hear more about the show or any of us, go to tellthedamnstory.com.